caught my wife sending boudoir pictures to another man. It started out as a pretty ordinary Tuesday evening. I had just gotten back from work, kicked off my shoes, and was settling into the couch with my laptop when my wife, Sarah, walked in. She gave me a quick smile, her phone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other, before heading upstairs. Everything seemed normal. But that night, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there, an unease I couldn't shake. We've been married for 6 years, and for the most part, things have been good. Sure, we've had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed we had a solid foundation of trust. Sarah is the kind of person who lights up a room, confident, witty, and beautiful in a way that's almost intimidating. She's always had this magnetic energy, and honestly, it's part of what drew me to her in the first place. But lately, I'd noticed her acting different. She'd been more secretive, glued to her phone, and her laughter seemed a little too forced. I chalked it up to stress from her new job, but deep down, I wasn't sure that was the whole story. That night, as Sarah took a shower, I noticed her phone sitting on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. We're not the type of couple who snoops through each other's things. But something about the way she'd been clutching it lately, like it was a lifeline, made my curiosity spike. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Her phone was unlocked, a small mercy for someone about to break their own rule of privacy. I told myself I'd just glance at her recent messages, maybe find a clue about why she'd been so distant. What I found instead hit me like a punch to the gut. There they were, a series of photos in her gallery. Boudoir photos. Tasteful, artistic, and undeniably stunning, but they weren't for me. The timestamps on the photos were recent, and the messages tied to them made my stomach drop. There were flirty captions, coy emojis, and an exchange with someone named Josh that left no room for misinterpretation. "You're absolutely breathtaking," one of Josh's messages read, followed by a fire emoji and a heart. Sarah's response? "Glad you think so, winking face." I felt my chest tighten as I scrolled further. Their conversation was intimate, playful, and filled with a chemistry I hadn't seen in our relationship for months. The realization was like a weight pressing down on me. My wife was sending these photos to another man. Not just any man, a man who clearly meant something to her. The shower turned off upstairs, snapping me out of my daze. I put her phone back exactly where I found it and sat down at the table, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do or how to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, demand answers, and figure out what the hell was going on. But another part of me was paralyzed by fear of what I might hear if I asked. By the time Sarah came downstairs, dressed in her favorite pajamas and with her hair still damp, I'd decided to play it cool. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. She kissed me on the cheek as she passed by, her smile warm and familiar, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop obsessing over what I'd found. Every time Sarah looked at her phone, my stomach churned. Every time she laughed at a text or stepped outside to take a call, I felt a fresh wave of suspicion. I started replaying moments in my head, searching for signs I'd missed. Had she been pulling away for months, and I'd been too blind to see it? Was there something I'd done, or failed to do, that pushed her into someone else's arms? The worst part was pretending everything was fine. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like a jealous, paranoid husband. But the longer I stayed silent, the more the weight of it all crushed me. I was barely sleeping, my appetite disappeared, and I started snapping at people at work for no reason. I felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching TV, I turned to Sarah and said, "We need to talk." She looked at me, startled. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I know about the photos," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face went pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she set her glass of wine down on the coffee table and asked, "What photos?" Don't, I said, shaking my head. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I saw them. The ones you sent to Josh. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I can explain, she said finally, her voice trembling. I wanted to believe her. I wanted her to tell me it was all a misunderstanding, that there was some innocent explanation for what I'd seen. But deep down, I knew better. And as much as I hated it, I needed to hear the truth. Then explain, I said, my voice harder than I intended. She hesitated, her shoulders shaking as she tried to compose herself. It's not what you think, she began, but I cut her off. Then what is it? I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. That's when she broke down, sobbing into her hands. I've seen Sarah cry before, but this was different. This was raw, guttural, and filled with a kind of regret that made my chest ache. But I couldn't let myself soften. Not yet. Talk to me, Sarah, I said, my voice quieter now. Please. She wiped her eyes and finally looked up at me. I made a mistake, she said, her voice cracking. A huge, stupid mistake. But it didn't mean anything. I swear. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her words at face value and move on. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Because mistakes like this? They don't just happen out of nowhere. Sarah's words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I stared at her, searching her tear-streaked face for some semblance of truth. If it didn't mean anything, then why? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Why would you do something like this? She took a deep, shuddering breath and looked down at her hands. I don't know, she admitted softly. I guess I felt lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I've been feeling disconnected. Josh was just there. He made me feel noticed. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I'd been working long hours lately, trying to save up for the house we'd been dreaming about. I thought I was doing the right thing for us, for our future. But hearing her say she felt lonely made me question everything. Was I really so wrapped up in work that I'd failed to see my own wife slipping away? That doesn't excuse it, I said, my voice firmer now. Feeling lonely doesn't give you the right to betray me like this. She nodded, her tears falling freely again. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll block him, delete everything, go to therapy, anything. Just please, don't give up on us. I wanted to believe her sincerity. I wanted to believe that this was just a horrible lapse in judgment, not a reflection of who she truly was. But trust isn't something that can be restored overnight. It's fragile, and once it's broken, it takes time and effort to rebuild. I need time, I said finally, standing up. I can't just pretend everything's okay. I need to figure out if I can move past this. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Don't shut me out. I'm not, I said, though it felt like a lie. I need space. I need to think. With that, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing on the couch. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to. Could I forgive her? Could we ever go back to the way things were? Or was this the beginning of the end? The next few days were a blur. I stayed with a friend, avoiding Sarah's calls and texts, while I tried to sort through my emotions. Part of me wanted to go back, to hold her and tell her we'd get through this. But another part of me was terrified of being hurt again. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal. It leaves scars. Finally, after nearly a week, I agreed to meet her. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, the air thick with tension. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from crying, but there was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there before. I've started therapy, she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did, so I can make sure it never happens again. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm committed to fixing this. To fixing us. Her words were earnest, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of hope. But hope isn't enough. It's a start, but it's not a guarantee. As I looked at her, I realized that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Whether we could rebuild what was broken was still a question without an answer. We'll see, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. And for now, that was the best I could do. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.